Millionaire forces pregnant Maid to leave, but years later, begs her forgiveness after DNA results. Before we continue, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Enjoy the story. The Voss estate was quiet at midday, the kind of silence that only immense wealth could afford. Sunlight poured through the vast windows, falling across marble floors and curated art pieces with an almost reverent glow. Everything about the mansion spoke of precision, pristine, sterile, and hollow beneath its beauty. Clara Mendoza stood on the second floor, just outside the office doors, trying to gather her breath. Her heart pounded not from fear, but something deeper. Grief, maybe, or something close to it. The words she'd rehearsed over and over seemed to melt from her mind the moment she looked up at the dark oak door. Her hand hovered, then knocked softly. "Come in," came the voice. Calm, commanding. She stepped inside. Damian Voss stood behind his desk, pen in hand, scanning a contract with that same unflinching focus he wore like armor. Tall, sharply dressed in a tailored black suit, he looked more like a sculpture than a man, carved in cold elegance. His silver watch gleamed under the lights, catching the glint of his eyes when they briefly lifted to her. She cleared her throat. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. He gave a nod, slow and distracted, then set the pen down. "You're not scheduled to work today." Clara stepped forward, her hands clasped together in front of her. "I know, but this isn't about work." He arched an eyebrow. "I'm pregnant." For a moment the words just hung there, untouched, unclaimed. He blinked once, slowly. The silence filled the room like a gas, pressing against her ribs. He set the pen down. "Is this a joke?" Her hands trembled. "No." He stood up then, moving around the desk, his steps slow and measured. He didn't raise his voice, he never did. His anger, when it came, was the quiet kind, precise and controlled. "And you're telling me this because you believe it's mine?" She met his gaze. "It is yours." He exhaled sharply, a laugh more bitter than amused. "So this is the plan. You want money, a payout." "I don't want anything," she said quickly. "I just thought you should know. That's all. I'm not asking for anything from you." His eyes darkened. "You expect me to believe that?" Clara bit her lip. "It happened after your sister's wedding. You were drunk. So was I. You asked me to stay." He waved her words away. "I remember. Barely. You came crying about your mother's hospital bills. I let you in. You're lucky I didn't fire you then." Her face flushed with shame, though it twisted into something else. Anger, heartbreak. "It wasn't like that. I didn't plan any of it. I cared about you. I still do, despite everything." That made him scoff. "Pack your things," he said. "I want you gone by tonight." Her breath caught. "Tonight? If you're not gone, I'll have security escort you out. And don't think for a second you'll show up here later, baby in your arms, looking for sympathy. I've seen this before. I won't be your mistake's father." She stared at him, barely blinking. Her face was calm, but her body trembled as if struck by a tremor no one else could feel. He turned away as if dismissing her presence with nothing more than a breath. She left without another word. The hallways were silent as she walked back to the servants' quarters. Not a soul met her gaze, but she could feel the eyes, the whispers that would follow. Her name passed from mouth to mouth like a smudged rumor. One more girl who had overstepped the boundary between help and boss. No one would side with her. In this house, power decided truth. Back in her small room, Clara folded her few belongings into a worn duffel bag. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if pretending this wasn't the last time she'd ever see this place. She glanced once at the narrow twin bed where she'd spent so many nights dreaming of something better, of warmth that might one day reach past the rich walls of the Voss estate. She pressed a palm to her stomach. The swell wasn't visible yet, but she could feel the change. A second heartbeat, a tiny flutter. She closed her eyes and let her fingers rest there just a moment. Maria, the cook, caught her at the rear entrance. A heavy silence passed between them before Maria opened her arms. Clara fell into them without hesitation. "Where will you go?" Maria asked, voice hoarse. Clara shrugged. "My cousin has a pull-out couch. I'll find work. Somewhere." Maria looked down at the bag. Then, from the front pocket of her apron, she pulled out a small roll of cash and slipped it into Clara's palm. "No," Clara started. "You'll need it. For the baby. I've been where you are, mija. Pride won't feed you. Clara swallowed her tears. Thank you. When the cab pulled up outside the gate, she stepped in without looking back. The mansion faded in the distance, swallowed by high walls and the looming trees Damian had paid to import from Europe. The driver didn't speak, but glanced at her in the mirror. She caught her reflection, pale, red-rimmed eyes, a dazed kind of stillness across her face. She smoothed her hair back and whispered to no one, "It's going to be okay." It had to be. As the city opened up beyond the wealthy neighborhood, past the gates, the perfect hedges, and the sleek black cars, Clara began to breathe again. Not easier, not without pain, but freer. The road turned familiar as they neared her cousin's small duplex in El Monte. The chipped paint and sagging porch had never looked more like home. Inside, her cousin Louisa opened the door and held her without asking questions. Clara collapsed into the hug, not because she was weak, but because someone finally let her be. Later that night, she sat on the old couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the shadows stretch across the ceiling. Outside, a siren wailed. The world had moved on. She placed a hand on her belly again, whispering, "I don't know how we're going to do this, but we will. I promise." In the dark, her promise hung like a thread, fragile, glowing, unbroken. The air in Luisa's cramped El Monte apartment was thick with the scent of frying onions and the muffled chaos of her two boys wrestling over a toy truck in the next room. Clara sat on the edge of the pull-out couch, her new bed, staring at the duffel bag she'd carried from the Voss estate. It rested against the wall like an accusation, a reminder of everything she'd lost in a single afternoon. Her hands, still trembling from the day's upheaval, pressed against her stomach. The life inside her was a secret she could no longer share with anyone but herself, and now it was her only anchor. Louisa emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a faded towel. Her round face softened as she looked at Clara. "You're staying as long as you need to, Prima. No arguments." Clara forced a smile. "I won't be a burden, Louisa. I'll figure something out." "You're not a burden," Louisa said firmly, sitting beside her. "You're family. And that baby," she nodded toward Clara's belly, "that's family too." Clara nodded, but the words didn't ease the knot in her chest. She had no job, no savings beyond Maria's small gift, and a child on the way. That night she lay awake on the creaking mattress, listening to the boys' snores and the distant wail of sirens. Her mind raced with plans, half-formed, desperate ideas about survival. She wouldn't let Damian's cruelty define her future. She couldn't. The next morning, Clara hit the pavement. She walked the cracked sidewalks of El Monte, her worn sneakers slapping against concrete, applying anywhere that might take her. Gas stations, laundromats, corner stores, all met her with polite rejections or outright indifference. Her pregnancy wasn't showing yet, but her lack of references and the faint tremor in her voice betrayed her desperation. By late afternoon, she stumbled into Rosa's kitchen, a diner tucked between a pawn shop and a nail salon. The bell above the door jingled, and the smell of coffee and grease enveloped her. Behind the counter, Rosa, a sturdy woman with silver-streaked hair and a no-nonsense stare, looked her over. "You looking for work?" Rosa asked, cutting straight to it. Clara nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Anything you've got. You ever waitressed?" "No, but I'm quick. I'll learn." Rosa studied her for a long moment, then jerked her head toward the kitchen. "Start tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Thank you. You won't regret it." "Better not," Rosa muttered, but there was a flicker of warmth in her eyes. The job was grueling. Clara's first shift left her dizzy, her arms aching from balancing trays, her feet throbbing in shoes that were a size too small. Customers barked orders, some kind, some curt, and she scrambled to keep up. But she did. She memorized the menu in 2 days, learned to anticipate Rosa's sharp commands, and pocketed every tip, quarters and crumpled dollar bills she stashed in a jar labeled baby fund. As the weeks turned to months, her belly swelled. Morning sickness clawed at her, forcing her to duck into the bathroom between orders, splashing cold water on her face to hide the nausea. Customers began to notice. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others stared with judgment. But Clara kept her head high. She had no choice. Rosa saw it all. One slow afternoon, as Clara wiped down tables, the older woman approached her. "You're tougher than you look, you know that." Clara paused, cloth in hand. I have to be. Rosa nodded. When that baby comes, you take some time. I'll hold your spot. I can't afford to stop, Clara admitted, her voice tight. I'll pay you for a week off, Rosa said gruffly. Don't argue, you'll need it. The kindness cracked something in Clara, and she blinked back tears. Thank you, Rosa. The labor came fast and fierce. It was a grey dawn when the first contraction hit, doubling her over on the pull-out couch. Louisa rushed her to the hospital, gripping her hand as Clara gritted her teeth through the pain. Hours blurred into a haze of sweat and screams, the world narrowing to the rhythm of her own breathing and the nurse's urgent voices. Then, a cry, sharp, piercing, alive. Clara's eyes fluttered open as the nurse placed a squirming bundle in her arms. A boy. His tiny face, red and wrinkled, was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. His eyes, dark blue like a storm at sea, locked onto hers, and she felt her heart split wide open. Gabriel, she whispered, naming him after her father, a man who'd taught her resilience. My Gabriel. Back at the apartment, life became a relentless cycle. Clara returned to work after 2 weeks, her body still aching, leaving Gabriel with Louisa or a neighbor who charged a few dollars a day. She hated every minute apart from him, but the rent wouldn't pay itself. At night, she'd cradle him, singing soft lullabies in Spanish, her voice trembling with exhaustion and love. Gabriel grew fast. By 2, he was a whirlwind of curiosity, toddling after Louisa's boys, chattering non-stop. Why's the moon round, Mama? He'd ask, pointing out the window. Clara would laugh, brushing his dark curls. Because it likes to shine for you, mijo. At 4, he started preschool, and his teachers marveled at him. He could count higher than his peers, draw intricate pictures of cars and birds, and ask questions that left them scrambling for answers. Clara attended every conference, her chest swelling with pride. Though the praise came with a sting, she couldn't afford the extra classes they suggested. She stretched every dollar. Birthdays were celebrated with cakes she baked herself, lopsided but sweet. Weekends meant trips to the park, where Gabriel chased pigeons and she packed sandwiches from day-old bread. At night, they read together, library books about planets, dinosaurs, machines, his small body pressed against hers on the couch. But the struggles never eased. When Gabriel was 5, a hacking cough turned into pneumonia. Clara spent a night in the ER, holding his hand as he wheezed, panic clawing at her throat. The bills arrived like a punch, hundreds she didn't have. She worked doubles at the diner, her eyes burning with fatigue until Rosa slipped her an envelope of cash. For the medicine, she said. Clara cried then, unable to refuse. By 7, Gabriel was a force. Tall for his age, with those striking blue eyes and a mind that raced ahead of everyone else's, he ruled the classroom. His teacher called him gifted, a word that filled Clara with equal parts joy and dread. Gifted meant potential, but potential needed resources she couldn't provide. Then came the science fair. Gabriel burst through the door one afternoon, waving a flyer. Mama, I want to make a solar car. It'll move with sunlight. Clara's heart sank at the thought of the cost, but his excitement was infectious. Okay, let's do it. They scavenged for weeks. Cardboard from the diner's trash, wires from a broken radio, a tiny solar panel she bought with her tip money. Nights blurred into a frenzy of glue and laughter, Gabriel sketching designs while Clara assembled parts. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but his grin kept her going. The morning of the fair, Clara took a rare day off. She stood in the school gym, surrounded by buzzing kids and proud parents, watching Gabriel present. His voice rang clear as he explained how sunlight powered his car, the little vehicle humming across the table. The judges, a mix of teachers and local business reps, leaned in, nodding, asking questions he answered with ease. When they called his name for first place, Clara's breath caught. Gabriel ran to her, trophy in hand, and she lifted him into a hug, tears spilling down her cheeks. You're incredible, mijo, so incredible. They celebrated with ice cream, his chatter filling the walk home. Clara watched him, her chest tight with love, and a fierce, quiet vow. I'll give you everything somehow. That night, as he slept, she sat by the window, staring at the stars. Gabriel's victory felt like a turning point, a crack of light in their shadowed life. She didn't know that it was also a beacon, one that would soon draw the past she'd fought to bury right back to her door. The Tech Expo glittered under a canopy of artificial lights, a cathedral of innovation where the future was forged by young hands and brilliant minds. For Gabriel Mendoza, it was a dream made real. His solar-powered car, crafted from scavenged parts and relentless determination, had won the local science fair, earning him a coveted spot in the city-wide showcase. At 7 years old, he was the youngest finalist, a fact that filled Clara with equal parts pride and terror. She'd spent weeks preparing him, stitching a second-hand suit from thrift store finds and whispering encouragement as she smoothed his dark curls. "You're going to shine, mijo," she said that morning, her voice trembling with emotion as she adjusted his tie. "Just be yourself." Gabriel's blue eyes, startlingly bright against his olive skin, sparkled with excitement. "I will, Mama." "Promise." The expo was a world apart from Clara's daily grind at the diner. Towering glass walls reflected the bustle of engineers, investors, and proud parents, all clad in crisp suits and designer dresses. Clara's faded skirt and scuffed flats marked her as an outsider. But Gabriel didn't notice. He tugged her hand through the crowd, marveling at drones and holographic displays with a child's unrestrained wonder. On the showcase stage, the finalists presented their projects. Gabriel stood tall despite his small stature, explaining his car's mechanics with a clarity that belied his age. Clara lingered at the back, her chest tight with love, as the audience leaned forward, captivated. When the judges peppered him with questions, he answered with a confidence that drew gasps and nods of approval. Then came the keynote address. A hush fell over the room as the speaker ascended the stage, a man whose silhouette alone radiated authority. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he moved with the ease of someone born to command. Clara's breath caught. She'd know that figure anywhere. Damian Voss. Panic seized her. She hadn't heard his name on the program, hadn't expected him here of all places. 8 years had passed since she'd last seen him, since he'd cast her out with a wad of cash and a sneer, but the sight of him unearthed every buried wound. She edged behind a display, her fingers digging into Gabriel's shoulder. "Stay here," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'll be right back." Gabriel nodded, distracted by a whirring robot, oblivious to the storm brewing in her chest. Clara wove through the crowd, her pulse hammering. She couldn't let Damian see her or Gabriel, not now, not when she'd finally clawed a life from the ashes he'd left her in. She'd survived his rejection, raised their son alone, and nurtured his brilliance without a penny of Voss money. This was her victory, not his. But fate was a cruel puppeteer. Damian finished his speech, something about innovation and legacy, and descended to greet the finalists. Clara watched helpless as he moved down the line, shaking hands with practiced charm. Then he reached Gabriel. Time slowed. Damian's hand met Gabriel's smaller one, and their eyes locked. Clara saw it, the flicker of confusion on Damian's face, the way his smile stiffened. He tilted his head, studying the boy as if piecing together a puzzle. Gabriel's sharp cheekbones, his dark curls, those piercing blue eyes, traits that echoed Damian's own features. Her stomach twisted. "I'm Gabriel Mendoza, sir," her son said brightly. "Thank you for the opportunity." Damian's voice was measured, but his gaze betrayed him. "Gabriel, how old are you?" "7, sir." A beat of silence. Then, casually, "And your mother, is she here?" Clara's blood ran cold. She stepped forward, her legs trembling. "Gabriel, come here, please." He turned, spotting her, and jogged over, his prize ribbon flapping against his chest. Damian's eyes followed, narrowing as they settled on her. Recognition dawned, sharp and undeniable. "Clara," he said, his tone low, edged with something she couldn't name. She squared her shoulders, forcing steel into her voice. "Mr. Voss." The air thickened, charged with years of unspoken pain. Gabriel glanced between them, his brow furrowing. "Mama, do you know him?" "He's an old acquaintance," she managed, her throat tight. Damian's lips twitched, a bitter hint of irony in his voice. "An acquaintance." A woman with a clipboard interrupted, her heels clicking. "Mr. Voss, the press is ready for you." He nodded, his gaze still fixed on Clara. "I'll be there soon." As the woman retreated, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We need to talk." Clara shook her head. "There's nothing to say." His eyes flicked to Gabriel, then back to her. I think there is. Fear clawed at her. She grabbed Gabriel's hand. We're leaving. Damian's hand shot out, closing around her arm. Not harsh, but firm. Wait. She yanked free, her voice a hiss. Don't touch me. He stepped back, startled, then masked it with composure. I just want to understand. There's nothing to understand, she snapped. You made your choice 8 years ago. Live with it. She turned and fled, pulling Gabriel with her. His confused questions echoed in her ears, but she didn't stop until they were outside, the cool night air stinging her tear-streaked face. Sleep eluded Clara that night. She paced their cramped apartment, the encounter replaying in her mind like a broken reel. Gabriel slept soundly, his trophy gleaming on the shelf, but her thoughts churned with dread. Damian had seen too much. Those eyes, his eyes, had betrayed the truth. He'd always been relentless. He wouldn't let this go. Her fear proved prophetic. 2 days later, as she wiped down tables at the diner, a black sedan rolled up outside. She recognized it instantly. A Voss family car. The driver, a stern man in a dark suit, approached her as she stepped out. Miss Mendoza, Mr. Voss requests your presence. Her mouth went dry. I'm not going anywhere. He didn't blink. He insists. It's about your son. The words pierced her. What about him? Mr. Voss will explain. She hesitated, her mind racing. Refusal might escalate things, and she couldn't afford a war with Damian, not when Gabriel's safety hung in the balance. Swallowing her pride, she nodded. Make it quick. The drive to the Voss estate was a silent torment, familiar streets blurring past. The mansion rose before her, its opulence a stark reminder of the life she'd been denied. The driver ushered her through the grand foyer, marble floors, towering portraits, to Damian's office. He stood behind his desk, a king in his domain, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair. Clara stayed on her feet. What do you want, Damian? He met her gaze, unflinching. The truth. About what? Gabriel. Is he mine? The question landed like a blow. She clenched her jaw, steadying herself. You know the answer. I need to hear it, he pressed, his voice taut. Yes, she said, the word bitter on her tongue. He's yours. Damian exhaled, a sharp, ragged sound. He turned to the window, his silhouette rigid against the glass. Why didn't you tell me? Her laugh was hollow, cutting. I did. You threw me out, handed me cash like I was some problem to be paid off. Or don't you remember? He faced her, his face ashen. That was a mistake. I was young, arrogant, and cruel, she finished. You don't get to rewrite it now. He stepped closer, his voice softening. I can make it right. Right? Fury surged in her chest. You think money fixes this? You think you can stroll back after 8 years and claim him? I don't want to claim him, he said, earnest. I want to know him. Know him? She trembled, her voice rising. You didn't want him then. He doesn't need you now. I've raised him, loved him, given him everything without you. Damian's eyes searched hers. I saw you at the expo, Clara. You're exhausted. Is that what you want for him? Don't, she snapped, her fists balling. Don't you dare judge me. He's happy. He's brilliant. That's because of me, not you. I know, he admitted, his voice breaking. I saw him. He's extraordinary. Silence fell, heavy with the weight of their shared past. Then Damian reached into his desk, pulling out an envelope. I had a DNA test done. Clara's heart stopped. What? I took a hair from his jacket at the expo. The results came today. He held it out. He's mine. Rage and betrayal surged through her. You had no right. Maybe not, he conceded, but I had to know. And now? She demanded. What's your plan? Take him from me. No, he said quickly. I don't want to fight. I just want a chance to be in his life. A chance? Tears burned her eyes. You don't deserve one. I know, he said, softer now. But maybe he does. Maybe he deserves to know his father. Her breath hitched. Gabriel's innocent questions over the years. Why don't I have a dad? Who was he? Echoed in her mind. She'd shielded him from the truth, but the longing in his eyes lingered. You'll hurt him, she whispered, her voice cracking. Like you hurt me. Damian's face crumpled, raw regret etching his features. I'm sorry, Clara, for all of it. I was wrong. Let me prove I've changed. It's not that easy, she said, shaking her head. I know, but think about it, for him. Clara turned away, tears spilling free. She'd fought so hard to protect Gabriel, to build a world without Damian's shadow. But now, that world was fracturing, and she couldn't see the way forward. I need time, she said at last. Take it, he replied. I'll wait. She left the estate, the envelope's weight a phantom in her mind. The choice loomed: keep Gabriel safe in their fragile life, or risk letting Damian in for better or worse. For her son's sake, she had to decide. But what was right? She didn't know. Not yet. Damian Voss sat alone in his opulent office, the silence pressing against him like a living thing. The DNA results lay crumpled in his fist, the ink smudged where his thumb had pressed too hard. 99.9% probability of paternity. The words stared back at him, cold and unyielding. A verdict on 8 years of cowardice. He had a son, Gabriel, a boy with his piercing blue eyes and Clara's unyielding spirit. A son he had discarded with a handful of cash and a slammed door. A ragged sob tore from his throat. He clamped a hand over his mouth, but the sound echoed in the cavernous room, swallowed by the marble and gold that mocked his isolation. Tears blurred his vision, and he didn't fight them this time. For all his wealth, his power, his carefully constructed empire, he was empty. A hollow man grasping at a truth he could no longer deny. His mind drifted, unbidden, to that night 8 years ago. His sister's wedding. The air thick with champagne and celebration. Clara had been there, a maid in his family's employ, her dark hair catching the light as they danced. He remembered her laughter, bright and unguarded, the way she'd looked at him, not as Damian Voss, heir to a fortune, but as a man. They'd talked for hours, sharing fleeting dreams between spins on the dance floor. Later, in the haze of alcohol and desire, he'd asked her to stay, and she had. The memory shifted, sharpening into the morning after. Clara standing in his room, her hands twisting nervously, her voice soft but steady. I'm pregnant. He could still see the vulnerability in her eyes, the tentative hope, and he could still feel the panic that had seized him, the way his heart had hardened as he reached for his wallet. Here's enough to take care of it, he'd said, tossing an envelope at her feet. Don't come back. Her face. God, her face. The hurt, the betrayal, the way she'd straightened her spine and walked out without a word. He'd told himself she'd be fine, that she'd forget him. A lie he'd clung to until today. Damian lurched to his feet, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. He couldn't sit here drowning in regret. Clara had asked for time after their confrontation, and he'd promised to give it to her, but the weight of his guilt was crushing him. He needed to act, to find a way forward. Perhaps Maria could help. The cook who'd been kind to Clara all those years ago might know something, anything that could guide him. He found her in the kitchen, her hands buried in a mound of dough, the air warm with the scent of yeast. She glanced up as he entered, her lined face tightening with suspicion. Mr. Voss, she said, wiping flour onto her apron. What brings you here? I need to talk about Clara, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Maria's eyes narrowed. What about her? I know Gabriel's my son. She told me everything. A long sigh escaped her, and she set the dough aside. So she finally did. Yes, and his voice broke. I want to make things right, but I don't know where to start. Maria studied him, her gaze sharp and unrelenting. You hurt her deeply, Mr. Voss. That day she came to me crying her heart out. I gave her what money I could, told her to go make a life for herself. And she did. Raised that boy alone, made him into something wonderful. Smart as a whip, kind as can be, just like his mother. Damian's chest tightened, a mix of pride and sorrow twisting inside him. I want to know him, to be part of his life. That's not your call, Maria said, her tone firm. Clara gets to decide that, and right now she's scared you'll break their hearts again. I won't, he swore, stepping closer. I've changed. I was a fool, a selfish bastard, but I'm not that man anymore. Words are cheap, Maria replied, crossing her arms. Actions take work. If you mean it, you've got to prove it, to her, to Gabriel. How? He asked, desperate. She left the estate, asked for time. I went to the diner, but Rosa said she took a leave of absence. I don't even know where she is. Maria hesitated, then softened slightly. She's with her cousin Luisa in El Monte. But don't expect them to roll out the welcome mat. Luisa's fierce about protecting her. Thank you, Damian said, relief flooding him. I'll go now. Mr. Voss? Maria called as he turned away. He paused, looking back. Be patient. Clara's been through hell. She won't trust you easily. I'll wait as long as it takes, he said, and he meant it. The drive to El Monte was a blur of asphalt and self-recrimination. What would he say? How could he convince Clara he wasn't the monster he'd been? The apartment building came into view. Crumbling stucco, a patchy lawn littered with toys. A stark reminder of the life Gabriel lived, so different from the one Damian could have given him. He knocked on Luisa's door, his pulse hammering. It swung open to reveal a woman with Clara's dark eyes, but a harder edge, her arms crossed like a barricade. Luisa, he ventured. Who's asking? She snapped. Damian Voss, I'm looking for Clara. She's not here, Luisa said, her tone icy. Please, he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. I just want to talk to her, to apologize. Luisa's lip curled. After 8 years? You think you can just show up and play daddy now? No, I don't. I know I screwed up, terribly, but I want to make it right, for her and Gabriel. She stared at him, then sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. She's in San Diego with our aunt. Needed space to think. Thank you, he said, gratitude washing over him. Can you tell me where? After a beat, she scribbled an address on a scrap of paper and thrust it at him. Don't make me regret this. I won't, he promised, clutching the note like a lifeline. The road to San Diego stretched endlessly before him, hours to wrestle with his thoughts. He thought of his life, the boardrooms, the parties, the shallow connections that crumbled under scrutiny. He'd built an empire, but it was a castle of sand, meaningless without family. Gabriel was his chance at something real, and Clara was the key he'd been too blind to see. He reached the aunt's house as dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. It was a modest place, a small garden blooming defiantly against the cracked pavement. Through the kitchen window he saw them, Clara and Gabriel, bent over a board game, their laughter spilling into the evening air. The sight pierced him, a bittersweet arrow of joy and regret. They were a family whole without him, and yet he ached to belong. He stepped from the car, his legs leaden as he approached. Clara looked up, her smile vanishing as she spotted him. She was out the door in an instant, fury etched into every line of her face. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice low but venomous. I needed to see you, he said, hands raised in surrender. To tell you I'm sorry. You can't just show up like this. I asked for time, Damian. I know, and I'm sorry for that too, but I couldn't wait. I had to tell you I want to be part of Gabriel's life, and yours if you'll let me. Her eyes blazed. You think it's that easy? You think you can waltz in after abandoning us? No, he said, his voice cracking. I know I don't deserve it. I was cruel, stupid. I hurt you, and I'll regret it every day. But please give me a chance to prove I've changed. Before she could answer, the door creaked open and Gabriel's small face appeared. Mama, who's that? Damian's breath caught. He knelt, meeting the boy's curious gaze. Hi, Gabriel. I'm Damian. I knew your mom a long time ago. From the science fair? Gabriel asked, recognition lighting his features. Yes, Damian said, a faint smile breaking through. You were incredible that day. Thanks, Gabriel grinned. Are you a scientist too? Not quite, but I work with technology. Say cool. Gabriel turned to Clara. Can he stay for dinner, Mama? Clara's expression was a storm of conflict. She looked from Gabriel to Damian, then back again. Not tonight, mijo. Mr. Voss was just leaving. Damian rose, the ache in his chest deepening. I'll go. But please, Clara, think about what I said. I want to be there for both of you. He turned and walked back to his car, her silence heavy behind him. As he drove into the gathering night, he knew this was only the beginning. Redemption was a road paved with patience and proof, and he was ready to walk it, no matter how long it took. The California sky stretched wide and golden above the cliffs of Big Sur, the ocean crashing relentlessly against the rocks below. Damian Voss stood at the edge, his tailored suit incongruous against the wild landscape, his dark hair whipped by the salty wind. He hadn't slept in days, Not since Clara's last text. We need to talk, alone. Meet me here. No park benches this time. No Gabriel's bright chatter to soften the air. Just the two of them teetering on the precipice of something final. He heard her footsteps before he saw her, the crunch of gravel under her boots. Turning, he caught his breath. Clara stood silhouetted against the setting sun, her auburn hair glowing like fire, her expression a storm of resolve and vulnerability. She wore a simple jacket and jeans, but there was a weight to her presence, a gravity that made his chest tighten. This wasn't the guarded mother he'd met in parks and diners. This was Clara, unfiltered, raw, ready to lay everything bare. "Damian," she said, her voice steady but laced with something he couldn't name. Anger, fear, maybe both. "Clara," he replied, stepping closer, though the distance between them felt like miles. "You wanted to talk. I'm here." She nodded, her arms crossed tightly across her chest as if holding herself together. "I've been thinking about us, about Gabriel, about what happens next." His heart thudded painfully. "Next?" "Yes," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "These past months, watching you with him, seeing you try, it's changed things. I can't deny that. But it's not enough, Damian. Not yet." He swallowed hard, the wind carrying away the edges of his composure. "What do you need from me? Tell me, and I'll do it." "Anything." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the roar of the waves. "You think it's that simple? That you can just ask and I'll hand you a checklist? This isn't a business deal, Damian. This is my son, my life, our life." "I know that," he said, his voice rising despite his effort to stay calm. "I know I can't fix 7 years in 7 months, but I'm trying, Clara. I'm here, every day, trying to be the man I should have been." Her eyes flashed and she took a step forward, closing the gap between them. "And what about me? Where do I fit in this redemption story of yours? Am I just the gatekeeper to Gabriel, or do you actually see me?" The question hit him like a fist, knocking the air from his lungs. He saw her then, really saw her. The lines around her eyes etched by years of worry he hadn't shared, the strength in her stance, forged in his absence, the flicker of hope she couldn't quite extinguish, even now. "I see you," he said, his voice breaking. "I've always seen you, Clara. Even when I was too blind to admit it, I loved you then, and I love you now. That's why I'm here, not just for Gabriel, but for you." Her breath hitched, and for a moment she looked away out at the endless sea. When she turned back, her eyes were wet with tears she refused to let fall. "Love isn't enough, Damian. It wasn't enough when I told you I was pregnant, and you walked away. It wasn't enough when I raised him alone, wondering if you'd ever care. Why should I believe it's enough now?" He took a step closer, desperate to bridge the chasm between them. "Because I'm not that man anymore. Losing you, losing him, it broke me. I spent years building walls, thinking power and money could fill the void. But they didn't. Seeing Gabriel at that science expo, seeing you fight for him, it woke me up. I don't want to be the man who walked away. I want to be the man who stays." Clara's hands trembled as she uncrossed her arms, letting them fall to her sides. "And if I let you in, what then? What happens when the guilt fades and the hard days come? Will you stay then, or will you run again?" "I'll stay," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "I swear it, Clara. I'll stay through every fight, every doubt, every moment you hate me. I'll stay because I love you both more than I've ever loved anything." She stared at him, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his words. Then, in a voice so soft it nearly drowned in the wind, she said, "I want to believe you." "Then believe," he pleaded, reaching for her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. "Let me prove it, not with promises, but with time. With every day I show up." For a long moment they stood there, hands clasped, the ocean roaring below. Then Clara stepped back, breaking the contact, and Damian's heart sank. "I need to think," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Alone. I'll call you tomorrow." Before he could respond, she turned and walked back to her car, her silhouette fading into the dusk. Damian stood rooted to the spot, the wind tearing at his clothes, his hope hanging by a thread. The next day dawned grey and heavy, the Los Angeles skyline shrouded in mist. Damian paced his office, the DNA results still crumpled on his desk, a silent testament to the stakes. His phone sat silent, mocking him with every passing minute. He'd poured himself a scotch but left it untouched, the burn no longer a comfort. When the call finally came, he nearly dropped the phone in his haste to answer. "Clara? It's me," she said, her voice steady but strained. "Can you come to the house? Gabriel's at school. We need to finish this." "Finish?" he echoed, dread pooling in his gut. "Just come," she said, and the line went dead. The drive to her small sunlit home in Pasadena was a torment of what-ifs. When he arrived, Clara was waiting on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. She didn't invite him in, just gestured to the steps. "Sit," she said, and he obeyed, the wood creaking under his weight. She sat beside him, close but not touching, and stared out at the quiet street. "I stayed up all night thinking about what you said. About us. About Gabriel." He held his breath, waiting. "I've spent 7 years protecting him," she continued, her voice low and fierce. "From the world, from you, from the pain of knowing his father didn't want him. And now here you are, asking me to let you in, to risk that pain all over again." "Clara?" "Let me finish," she cut in, her tone sharp. "I hated you, Damian. For so long, I hated you. But watching you with him, seeing how he lights up when you're around, it's made me question everything. He deserves a father. And maybe I deserve to stop running from what we could have been." His heart leaped, but he stayed silent, sensing the fragility of the moment. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Terrified, actually. But I'm tired of being afraid. So I'm making a choice, not just for Gabriel, but for me." She turned to him then, her eyes searching his. "I'm giving you a chance, Damian. A real one. But it's not a blank slate. You don't get to erase the past. You have to live with it every day and prove you're worth this." "I will," he said, his voice raw with gratitude. "I swear, Clara, I'll spend my life proving it." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Then start today. Gabriel's science fair is tonight. He wants you there, both of us." Damian's throat tightened and he reached for her hand again. This time she squeezed back, her grip firm and real. That evening, the school gymnasium buzzed with chatter and the hum of makeshift experiments. Gabriel stood proudly beside his project, a solar-powered car he'd built from scratch, his blue jacket swapped for a crisp white shirt. When he saw Damian and Clara enter together, his face split into a grin that lit up the room. "Dad! Mum! You came!" he shouted, racing over to hug them both. The word Dad still hit Damian like a thunderbolt, but now it came with a warmth he'd never known. Clara smiled, her hand resting lightly on Gabriel's shoulder. "We wouldn't miss it, mijo." The night unfolded in a blur of pride and connection. Gabriel explained his car's mechanics with infectious enthusiasm, his hands flying as he gestured to wires and panels. Damian listened, asking questions, his chest swelling with a love so fierce it hurt. Clara stood beside him, her presence a quiet anchor, her laughter mingling with their son's. As the awards were announced, Gabriel's name rang out, first place. The crowd cheered, but his eyes sought only his parents. Damian lifted him onto his shoulders, Clara's hand brushing his arm as they celebrated together, a family in the making. Later, under the stars outside the school, Gabriel ran ahead to show off his trophy to friends, leaving Damian and Clara alone. The air was cool, the night alive with possibility. "Thank you," Damian said, turning to her. "For this. For everything." Clara met his gaze, her eyes soft but steady. "This is just the start, Damian. We've got a long